Hi, and welcome to today's training, which is all about how to effectively manage neurodivergent staff. I'm Christina, and I'm excited to have you here today. Throughout our session today, we are going to be focusing on how to support ourselves in the context of supporting our neurodivergent staff. And we're also going to be focusing on what that looks like. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and kick this off. Okay. So we are going to be taking some breaks as we go. I'll be sharing resources as well. If you have signed up for this presentation via Eventbrite or with me directly, you'll receive copies of this slide deck. So don't worry about getting all the information down. However, I do encourage you, for things that are important to you, take notes, because notes, especially when you're handwriting, does allow you to retain a lot better than it is just trying to absorb sometimes. I always like to kick off so that you understand a little bit about me. And so I'm Christina Proctor. I spent 20 years in and around the corporate world. I consider myself a corporate dropout. I focused mostly in marketing communications, revenue management, as well as leadership training and development. Those are areas that I still am very passionate about. I also have ADHD and dyslexia. So it's important to know that some of the content that I'll be providing is me being vulnerable and letting you know what my experience is at work, but also coming from a research standpoint. I do a lot of research for these presentations, and when you receive the decks, you'll also get the sources page. So you can see where a lot of this information came from. So I want to kick things off. And if you're in the live Zoom, you'll get a question poll. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the answers to these questions. So let me see if I can get this launched. Or not. That is okay. So the first question is, and you can let me know in the chat, what do you think the answer is? Dyslexia is a mental disorder where people see things backwards and struggle with motor skills. The key is not to judge you on where you are with this. It's more along the lines of to give you and to give me an understanding about where you are, and also what we're going to be learning about today. If you're watching this on another platform, you won't be able to see the slides, but you can get access to them if you subscribe to my email. Okay, so dyslexia is not a mental disorder, or just where people see things backwards. It is definitely it's a learning disability, and it impacts how your brain is literally wired. So I'd like to dispel those myths. The next one I'm giving to you for free, which is ADA, which is the American with Disabilities Act, does not cover neurodivergent diagnosis. It does cover neurodivergent diagnoses. And so I think that is important to acknowledge. There was a comment in the chat about motor skills. And so when we identify different types of things that can impact motor skills, yet people, when we learn about dyslexia, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, it really is about learning how they see things in the world, especially in a three-dimensional space. Number 3, ADHD has 3 variations: myth or truth. Let me give you a second to think about that one. All right, for that one, that is true. And a comment in the chat is also true. When it comes to diagnostics right now, there are 3 variations. So the answer to this is also a little bit complicated. Technically,
heads up or anything from our conversation. I just forgot to because I did something really stupid. And I just wanted this. I emailed our
right.
but I emailed.
All right. So Lorraine, I didn't know if you had a question, but I'll go ahead and mute you. If you do, you can unmute. Sorry about that. So ADHD does have 3 different variations that you can be diagnosed with. If you dive into the research, there are, I believe, 7 or 8 that are actually the different types of ADHD. So I put that as a truth because it has to do a lot with how people are actually getting diagnosed. So number four, I'll give to you, which is autistic people are challenged by empathy. This is a common misconception. And I see this a lot with organizations when I do training, is that they feel like people on their team who are autistic, who have disclosed, don't have empathy. And the fact of the matter is that that's not true. A lot of diagnostic criteria in the DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual, are really all about ways that other people experience neurodivergent people. So somebody who is autistic might show their empathy and their sympathy and the way they show their emotions differently than somebody that is not autistic. So they do and are able to have empathy. They may display it in a different way. So that's something I like to push out there pretty quickly. Number five, I would love to hear what y'all's thoughts are. Is it a myth or a truth? Medication can help alleviate ADHD symptoms. I'm going to give you a minute, put it in the chat. Let me know what you think. Right, anybody? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I like somebody said it can help-ish. It can help alleviate ADHD symptoms. And that's why the answer is it's complicated. So this is feels like a trick question, I know, but the reality is that medication can help alleviate some ADHD symptoms. It's not going to eradicate all ADHD symptoms. Many people, including the people taking the medication, have this thought that when you start taking ADHD meds, that their ADHD should just completely go away. That's not true. I would say that now I am somebody who is medicated. It does help with certain things like focus. It doesn't tell me what to focus on. It doesn't mean I'm focusing on the right things, but it does help me with focus and it calms the my brain down immensely, which is so incredibly helpful when you're working on getting things done. So, but what it doesn't necessarily help are ADHD symptoms like time blindness. Time blindness is something that you're really challenged by the concept of time, which could translate to how long things take, uh, even getting down to figuring out your schedule of how long you have to go from one place to another physical location. And planning can be very difficult with time blindness. Not insurmountable, but challenging. When we think about myths or truths, I always like to start off with that slide because it puts us in a position to understand that we're going in possibly with some biases or with some unawareness or with some other challenges that we didn't necessarily know that we had. So we're going into this training knowing that there are always more things to learn. With that, we're going to get on the same page with vocabulary. I do this so that everybody knows where I'm coming from when it comes to how we define neurodivergent. This is really about someone whose brain and processes info in a way that's not typical. So it's not just information as you might read in the newspaper, a report, or email text correspondence. It's also processing information in the whole world around them. And that means a lot. Our brains, for people who have autism, especially, they are able to take in a lot more stimuli based on how their brain is wired. Science has shown that autistic brains take in up to 40% more stimuli in the world around them than a neurotypical brain does. Because a brain that is autistic does not go through as much pruning within the context of the brain as it's growing that a neurotypical brain does. So that's a lot. So think of the fact that you're walking through the world and make the lights in front of you 40% brighter. The smells 40% more, 40% stronger. Sometimes that is the world that neurodivergent people are walking through. Not all of them, but some of them, mostly people with autism. Dr. Edward Hallowell is going to be guiding us today based on how he has this wonderful quote. So, ADHD is a term that describes a way in being in the world. It's neither entirely a disorder nor entirely an asset. It's an array of traits specific to a unique kind of mind. So that is what I want you to take into the training today is we're focusing on traits and support. So the title of this workshop was How to Manage Neurodivergent Staff. And I want you to go in with a thought of traits because you could have a staff member who has some of these traits, may not have autism, may not be autistic. You could have somebody who has traits of dyslexia, isn't diagnosed and or isn't dyslexic, but is challenged by some areas. So you can take some of these tools and apply them regardless of neurodivergent brain or not. So focusing on traits. We're not here to diagnose. The goal is I want you to focus on traits so you can understand the neurodivergent brain experience as we walk through the world. The most common neurodivergent diagnoses are the ones on the screen. There's 4. Specifically, the most common and the most commonly ones people know. Autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, also known as ADHD, dyslexia, and dyscalculia. The top 2, ADHD and ASD, are very common. I'm going to jump right into this. There are lots of challenges when people have ADHD and autism, and dyslexia and dyscalculia. So these, I want you to have the perspective of these are some of the things you may not see at work, but they are part of the experience for each one of these diagnoses. Something you may not see is sensory overwhelm. Somebody who is autistic might get very overwhelmed with the lights, smell, sounds of a workplace. Maybe you see them go into their office throughout the day and shut the door and, to get some work done. And you're trying to figure out why are they going in there and shutting the door. That's not a part of our culture. But also they could be experiencing sensory overwhelm. You may not see it. We have the word meltdowns on here. I don't really like that term, but that is a term that neurotypicals use. And really what that is you're in a sensory overwhelm of some kind. You're in overwhelm of some kind. So you do have meltdowns. That comes in lots of different fashions, right? It could be they go silent and don't do anything. It could mean that they're crying and upset. It could be that they're very emotionally dysregulated in a meltdown and they get angry. It can look different ways. You may not see it though. And we're not going to go through each one of these boxes, but the one I want to make sure that we do hit is higher rates of depression for people with autism. You may not see that. And unsure about social skills, social cues. So they mask in order to fit in. I would love to hear in the chat, are these some of the things that you have experienced with maybe a staff member or a colleague? Yes, yeah, absolutely. And so thank you for that. And I think that's important to note is that it doesn't mean that that person has autism. It could mean lots of different things. In the ADHD column, executive dysfunction is something you may not see. Executive dysfunction, like in autism, it's all about your prefrontal cortex of your brain. This is where decision-making, planning, time management, impulsivity all live. So if you're challenged with your executive functioning in the prefrontal cortex of your brain, you're going to have challenges in some of those areas. I'm going to talk about challenges a lot. Again, does not mean they can't do their jobs. I want to be very plain. It absolutely does not. Kirsten said, the brain just works differently and the need adjustments to meet the expectations. Absolutely. 100%. I'm so glad you recognize that. Thank you so much. So with ADHD, some of the other areas that you might not see, hyperfocus, you may not see it as a challenge, but it can be. Special interests, you may hear about them or you may not if they don't come up in the workplace. For dyslexia, this is really a language-based learning disability. It is in the neurodivergent umbrella. Same thing with dyscalculia. This is a numbers-based disability. And so with dyslexia, they could have difficulty reading, especially reading out loud. They could read or write slowly. Again, does not mean they can't. It just means it's going to be hard. They also might have a hard time concentrating when distractions are present. And you could say, Christina, everybody does. Not always, but people with dyslexia can have a very difficult time with it because they have to put so much into the reading. Having outside stimuli can just be incredibly overwhelming. Dyscalculia, getting lost easily, like physically lost in, especially in like when driving or walking, especially in new places. Mental math can be difficult. Difficulty reading clocks and or graphs and charts. They also could have difficulty recognizing numbers. It doesn't mean that they can't, it just means it's a challenge. Okay, I like to have these two charts because here are the challenges you may not see. Here's how it might show up for you as a colleague and or as a manager. Autism, you might see repetitive behaviors. You know, everything from skin picking to repeating themselves to a physical pacing. Repetitive behaviors sometimes can be incredibly soothing for an autistic. Social difficulties, maybe they're having a difficult time understanding the dynamics around how the culture in the organization dictates behavior. It's not necessarily a rule or a policy, it's more, this is just said. And I'll give you an example of that. Could be when people say, hey, I have an open door policy. I, as somebody with ADHD, did not necessarily understand what that meant when I was first starting work. So that was a social difficulty that I had because I thought that meant I can go and talk to the vice president when I wanted to or had a challenge. And the answer is you can't. It's something that people say, I have an open door policy, but you have to learn the social protocol before you get there. So if I have an interpersonal challenge, I don't go to the vice president, I go to my boss or that person, and then there's a chain of command from there. So somebody with autism might have challenges understanding those dynamics. They might have sensory sensitivities. You may not see, but you might see their special interests or hyperfocus. There's some overlap here with ADHD and autism that you might see already. ADHD might have difficult focusing, especially finding focus with repetitive tasks that are mundane for them after they learn how to do them. Not filtering their words and what they're thinking before they talk. I had that challenge as somebody with ADHD in corporate, 100%. Shiny project syndrome. That is a major challenge. You might see that where they jump in head first into a brand new project and they have 4 that are sitting waiting to be completed. Dyslexia, you could see at work difficulty writing answers, not carrying out directions, as well as sequential directions, like this, and then this. If you're only giving that verbally, that can be a huge challenge for somebody who has dyslexia as well as somebody who has ADHD, because that involves a lot of executive functioning to process through. Dyscalculia, you might see that they have difficulty with distances, challenges with understanding graphs or charts. We talked about that a little bit. And then the bottom right last block, I could really put across all of these, which is the gap between ability and aptitude. We often see people who are neurodivergent, are autistic, are ADHD, dyslexic, and we feel like they could do more. That is the story of our lives. I will be honest with you. We heard that constantly growing up. You're not fulfilling your potential. You have so much potential. I hated that word by the time I graduated high school. It meant nothing because all it told me was that I was not enough as I was. And we hear it a lot. So you see an ability, but the aptitude, there's a gap in between. And honestly, where the gap resides is where accommodations can live. And understanding how the brains work, that is something that is on the person who is neurodivergent and on an employer to be able to close that gap with accommodations. That is hopefully what you're able to leave with a start today. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. If you need to stand up and stretch, I am somebody who definitely needs to stop and take a sip of water. When you look at, I would also like to answer a question for a minute or so. When you see some of these diagnoses at work, what comes up for you? Are these things that you see outside of neurodivergent brains? I will tell you, I talked about this twice in these same workshops last week. Difficulty focusing, not filtering their words, having trouble with communication, executive dysfunction challenges. You know what that also aligns with is grief. So if you have staff that have gone through a lot of grief, there are some things that you can do to support them in the process. I personally have lots of experience with grief, and I encourage you as you move through this, not to just think about the people that you have identified have traits of neurodivergent brains, but also the people who might be going through stages in life that might have executive functioning challenges, that might be overwhelmed with home life for various reasons, or just overwhelmed with the state of the world. Because sometimes that definitely can impact our sleep, which negatively impacts our ability to have great executive functioning. Again, where planning, time management, and all those things live.
That's an interesting point. Um, so like with everything that's been going on with recent events, I feel like more and more people are having a hard time coping, right?
Yes.
And like just in the past 5 years, we've experienced such change to our society and
Mm-hmm.
how we operate in business spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of people working from home, they were able to like unmask and really like understand what was going on underneath it all. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
because like diagnoses like, PTSD or
Yeah.
grief or, you know, hormones can impact how our brain functions. And
Yeah.
so as we're like moving through transitions individually and collectively, I
Mm-hmm.
think it's very important that we understand, okay, how do we move this forward in a way that's not going to like have as much friction? Because like I feel like so many workplaces are like, oh, like it's just really bad employees. Okay, well, if
Right.
we're seeing a pattern of really bad employees, maybe the systems we have are not catering to employees' needs.
Exactly. And I think that is really great point, Kirsten, where it's thinking beyond just certain buckets, where we're looking at the whole person and the whole team and those needs. 100%. I love that. Yeah, thinking about the systems and how they impact and if they're working or if they're not, because they could have worked for 20 years. And then suddenly in the past 5 years, the game's changed. So thank you for that. Okay. Coming back from break. So if you went to go get some water or run to the restroom, we're coming back at it. We're going to go through 3 different neurotypes. We're not going to cover neurotypicals today. We're going to focus on dyslexia, ADHD, and autism. Okay. Starting with dyslexia, it is estimated that 1 in 5 people globally have dyslexia. It is a genetic difference in the ability to process information. So I want you to have that sink in for a second. 1 in 5, 20% of the population has a genetic difference in how they process info. It's incredible. Of course, a lot of people don't know that they are dyslexic. They think and learn differently, and this has been shown through fMRI scanning. They literally are wired differently in how their brains light up and how information moves. Some of the strengths that people often don't think about with dyslexia, people with dyslexia tend to do really well in big picture processing. So if you're thinking ideation, if you're thinking how to move through a tumultuous time, dyslexic brains are able to connect dots. They're really great at pattern recognition. So are autistics and ADHDers. They're solving problems and seeing patterns can be great in the workplace. It also can be challenging for the dyslexic because people don't see it as quickly as they do. So a big thing that I work on with my clients who are dyslexic and autistic and ADHD especially is how to bring people with them. So learning dyslexia, in summary, dyslexia is a learning disability. Who has dyslexia in the world around us? It is predicted that, or said that they believe that Albert Einstein also had dyslexia and was challenged by it in a lot of ways. And it shows his creativity in the areas of science as well as art. So, I mean, he did a lot of, or had personal artistic pursuits and did a really good job, obviously, in so many different types of fields in science. Whoopi Goldberg is a professional actress, and I think she's also on the show The View, with dyslexia. She did not know she had dyslexia until she was much older. So Whoopi Goldberg is somebody who came out and said, once I was diagnosed, everything kind of made sense. So whenever people say people with dyslexia can't do X, Y, and Z, I look at these two people and I'm like, it is possible. It doesn't mean it's not challenging. It just means that there might be some challenges that you work to overcome. How does dyslexia look at work? Some challenges. We talked about these. Keeping up for notes for others in meetings, specifically for others in meetings. So people with dyslexia have major challenges, not just handwriting, but taking notes and absorbing information that could be prioritized in the moment. Prioritizing information, especially when they're taking notes, is a challenge. So lecture notes, notes in a team meeting, that's a challenge. The second bullet, I talk a lot with organizations about having to read and process information with other people in real time. That can be a challenge for many people, not just dyslexics, but especially dyslexics, because when we're given content, we're already struggling with reading and it's already slow and working through some language in this learning disability, right? So if we're having to read and absorb and process the information while people around us are talking about it, it's going to I'm not going to be participating in this meeting. It's going to be a huge challenge. And so you're basically disconnecting a staff member when you force that. You're going to see spelling and grammatical errors. You will see spelling and grammatical errors in my presentation today. I have dyslexia. I have reviewed it. It's life. Some also might have trouble reading, while others might have more trouble with writing. Do any of these things come up at work? Has anybody seen these challenges? Especially when organizations say, well, these are just such small errors, you should have caught them. That is what I would hear a lot. Yeah, absolutely. All right. I want to talk about strengths. These are not talked about enough for dyslexic and dyslexic people at work. So first strength is skilled thinking abstractly, coming up with unique ideas. The second bullet is all about visual and spatial skills. So they often exhibit remarkable abilities in the area of spatial skills and visual skills. And this is interesting because when you think about somebody with dyslexia, people are often thinking, oh, they see words and letters backwards. But if you had exceptional visual and spatial skills where your brain kind of processes things differently, it would be a challenge to read. I want you to think about a letter in the alphabet that when you turn it upside down or flip it the other way, is it a different letter without making many changes or any changes at all? The letter B, the letter Q, the letter D, the letter P, exactly. Letter P, D, exactly. So if you have spatial skills where stuff is kind of moving and you're able to visualize it, you're going to be challenged by words that are sitting on a page, especially with those letters that can be interchangeable and moving them around. It's going to be a challenge. It's not made for their brains. So something else that you would see as a strength for ADHD and dyslexia is exceptionally strong verbal communication skills. When I was in corporate, I was asking for information around how to, some follow-up that I missed for a meeting. So I was wanting to know kind of best next steps for my team to pass information on. So I set a meeting with the person who was leading the project. And she was really confused about why I needed clarification. I was having trouble processing her report and her brief document that she provided the marketing team. And so as we got to talking, I said, I appreciate your time. I know this is frustrating for you. I have dyslexia. Talking it through with you helps me be able to clear up some of the questions that are lingering in my brain that I'm not getting from the doc. And she was like, you can't have dyslexia. You speak so well. And not only did that hurt, I'm used to it by now, but not only in the moment did that hurt, she explained to me that the only experience she'd had with somebody who she knew was dyslexic was with somebody who had a really hard time communicating. So she associated immediately that somebody who is dyslexic cannot have strong verbal communication skills. And the reality is that a lot of times people with dyslexia are able, if they're having trouble with written communications, they overcompensate and they get exceptional skills from other places. So dyslexia at work can look very different, person to person too. They're also really good at articulating complex ideas and tailoring their communication to resonate with diverse audiences, which is interesting if you are an organization talking to investors, getting buy-in from larger organizations, having stakeholder conversations. Somebody with dyslexia is able to connect, which is incredibly interesting and isn't talked about enough. So when you think about dyslexia moving forward, I would love for you to think about those strengths as ways that you can support your staff with ADHD to elevate their strengths in the workplace. So next up, we're talking about ADHD. All right. So ADHD, like dyslexia, is genetic. I have it, and many members of my family have it, as well as dyslexia. It is a brain-based syndrome that has to do with regulation of a particular set of brain functions and related behaviors. So this is why a lot of things with people who have ADHD are put into behavioral type programs in school. Dyslexic kids usually aren't unless they have comorbidities with ADHD. That's more of a learning. ADHD has more of a behavioral impact. It is neurobehavioral, so it like impacts your brain and your actions and all of that type of stuff. And there's not a cure. Okay, right now there is not a cure for ADHD. I know that a lot of people say that there is. Right now, pardon me, there is not. People with ADHD, some amazing people, I might add, Simone Biles, who is literally the greatest of all time, the GOAT in gymnastics. She has ADHD. She's talked about the challenges that she's had in her life, and also she's talked about how she takes medication and it helps her focus, and the challenges with getting the medication for her ADHD in other countries when she competes. That's something that she works on. Emma Watson, was going to college and filming the Harry Potter series at the same time. That requires a lot of focus. Again, it doesn't mean that somebody with ADHD is not able to focus. It just means that they might be able to focus on things that they're interested in. So how does it look at work? Some challenges that you might see: staying on task. The second bullet is something that people don't often know about, which is carrying the project the last 10 to 20%, finishing it that last bit. Time blindness, working memory, perception of rejection. We didn't talk about it on the earlier slides, but perception of rejection is on here because ADHDers, Dr. Edward Hallowell, who's the ADHD researcher we quoted in the beginning, believes that rejection sensitivity dysphoria is a unique ADHD experience. And what happens when you are ADHD and you're experiencing RSD, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, is that you are experiencing the perception of potential rejection. So it's not even that it's actively there, it's that it could be, which is paralyzing for many. And then people default to perfectionism. They don't know where to start, and then they get overwhelmed because they're worried about doing it perfectly. And so they feel like they need to start perfectly instead of starting and taking messy action. So you might see it that way. And ADHDers at work can also come off as combative if they are not given the whole picture to work with. That can be challenging for leaders, especially leaders who they themselves may not get all of the information. They're just asked to complete a task. And so learning to build that trust with your ADHDers and your members of your staff to say, yeah, I get you. And I hear you where you want to do this excellent and you want to do an amazing job on this project that we're being asked to do in a very short time frame. I don't have the answers to your questions. Let's note them and say what we would do if to get it out of our systems. And then let's do the task so that if we are asked to do these other things, we have it documented. That's what I usually recommend for leaders. Strengths are abundant with ADHD, like dyslexia, and we'll talk about autism too, of course. Hyperfocusability, especially there are 4 ways an ADHD brain is activated: urgency, novelty, passion/interest, and competition. When you are working to engage somebody with ADHD, think about those 4 things. If there's no urgency, like a deadline, if there's no passion or interest that they have in it, if there's not competition even with themselves, other team members, or the industry, urgency, passion/interest, novelty, if it's not new, it's going to be really hard to dive in. So think about those things when you are working with somebody with ADHD on their goals. ADHDers are typically high energy. It doesn't mean hyperactive externally. It could be that they have high energy for excitement for new projects or teamwork. Justice oriented, hard workers on things that they're passionate about. There we go. They're also nonlinear thinkers, which can be a challenge when you are talking with teams and you feel like they're all over the place. And Kirsten made a really good point. We can also be intense. The small chit chat, the intro parts can be very challenging for us. We want to get to the meat and we want to be honest with you about it. So ADHDers at work can be intense. We can have hyperfocus. Sometimes a part of the intense falls into the justice oriented and working through what is the responsibility of the organization and what is the responsibility of a person. We, as organizational leaders, are not able to be the justice all over the world for things. There are certain things we can help with, and we can't do it all. Okay? So willing to jump on new projects and very imaginative. Okay. When it comes to ADHD, I would love to hear in the chat, what are some of the things that you see in your organization when it comes to some of the strengths of somebody with ADHD? We can be a tense, roll with the changes, adapt. We are adaptable. And it can look different for different ADHDers, right? Adaptability can mean I just started something and I'm able to pivot because it's new. Yeah, multitaskers, although it's a very pivot all day. Yes, we totally can. And that's one of the interesting things. So people who are really enjoy variability and having a different day to day roughly is good for somebody with ADHD. And with an asterisk, I tell people all the time, I want change throughout the day. I also benefit from structure. Going and knowing at 9:05 is when this call starts. And then from 9:50 to noon, I've got some free time to do work. So it doesn't mean that I do the same work every day in the same order. It means I've got certain times when I'm available or I can make the decisions. Having some autonomy in there is key and so helpful for somebody with ADHD. All right, the last one we're going to talk about today is autism spectrum disorder. This information, as we go through it, is important because it'll help inform you how to support. When you are able to recognize traits and challenges that people have, it's not just focused on the solution, it's focused on the trait and the need, and then asking questions. And we'll dive into that a little bit more. What is autism? Now, I'm not here to dive into every single scientific aspect. So these are overviews, y'all. So autism specifically is a neurological and developmental disorder, and it impacts how people interact with others in the world around them. And that impacts communication, learning, as well as behavior. We see behavior again, just like we did in ADHD. So again, oftentimes kids with autism or autistic kids are put into behavioral type organizational schools, classrooms, etc. It is known as a spectrum disorder because there's a huge variation of type and severity of symptoms that people experience when it comes to autism. People with autism that are famous, Brianna Clark, who is an Olympic runner, is autistic, as well as rapper Eminem. He is autistic. And so when people think about autism only looking one way, they're doing not only a disservice to themselves and their understanding of the world and the autistic experience, but they're also not understanding how wide of a spectrum it really is. Okay, why we're here, autism at work. Some challenges that you might experience as a leader, as a coworker of somebody who is autistic. They might have traits and challenges with sensory challenges, unspoken social rules. We talked about that when it came to people, being told that there was an open door policy, but that's not really a policy. And it's also not really what people want. They don't want to be interrupted 27 times a day. Autistics might have challenges with unclear guidelines and directions at work, as well as rules that are not equally applied. So especially equally applied on the same team or on larger teams from team to team. Directions not being documented. This is a challenge because we want to go back and reference, but also executive dysfunction, right? Working memory, being verbally told directions and expecting us to regurgitate it back or take action immediately can be very overwhelming. Being held to typical standards that aren't connected to a rule. A lot of organizations with culture type departments are challenged because they say this isn't a policy, it's our culture. And that can be a huge issue for somebody with autism because they're trying to learn how to function within the context of rules that may be connected to something logical for them. But a cultural rule or a cultural standard doesn't necessarily have a why behind it, like safety or finances, etc. And that leads into the last one. They're challenged with rules that don't have a basis or foundation. So when people hear, autistics are like that structure and like policy, yes, as long as they make sense and are based on something that has a basis and a foundation. So let's talk about strengths. Hyperfocus, huge thing for autistics, able to hone in on something that they're very interested in or engaged with. They have high pattern recognition similar to ADHDers and dyslexics. They have cognitive strengths like high attention to detail They also might be the type of autistic that is punctual. Not all autistics are. There's something called comorbidities where they also have ADHD, and the ADHD impacts their ability to be places on time. I'm one of those people. They have a very seemingly rigid connection to rules and policies that are logical. So it's like they are very connected to it and they will follow them. They're also great at alternative problem solving, thinking beyond what is in front of them. So I like to highlight autism at work when it comes to strengths. This is not an exhaustive list. This is not even close. Okay. Strengths that are not on this list. They typically, especially when accommodated well at work, and accommodations don't have to be huge. We'll get into that. When accommodated well, they employers have seen a significantly higher attendance rate, engagement with other team members, larger productivity, not just directly with the employee, but also directly with the larger teams as well. So people who have autism have an amazing focus and are phenomenal on teams, especially in areas where they are interested. So it's not just about numbers, although somebody who has autism definitely could have a hyper interest in the types of math that you need for your organization. They also could have a heart for serving others. It could be the first one in line to volunteer. Comorbidities. This is a word that not everybody is familiar with. It basically means that people have overlapping diagnoses. Often when people are diagnosed as autistic, it's not uncommon for them to also have ADHD. I think the percentage now that they're estimating is that if you have autism, you're like 80% more likely to also have ADHD. And that's also nicknamed ADHD, the AUDHD. Dyslexia and dysgraphia can go together, as well as ADHD and dyslexia, and you could have all of them. You could have autism with OCD. EDS is not a neurodivergent diagnosis. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is what came through in the chat. So Ehlers-Danlos is a joint, I believe it's a joint connectivity. It has a high comorbidity with autism. It definitely is a comorbidity. Connective tissue. Thank you. Connective tissue. I was more focused on the comorbidities with other neurodivergent diagnoses today. But EDS, that's a great point, is that when people are autistic, especially when they're diagnosed, they often have additional diagnoses that come with that. Autoimmune disorders. EDS, which is the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which impacts your connective tissues. Endometriosis, PCOS, a lot of those things overlap and can impact their day-to-day, which makes it even harder to move through work if you're in physical pain already or struggling to move or do those other things can impact how you show up at work. All right, we're going to take a quick break. I'm going to put a timer up. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We're going to take a 2-minute break. I would love to hear from you if you have questions. We talked about people with dyslexia, people with ADHD, the strengths and the challenges that they may face in the workplace. What questions come up? And I'll look over here if there's any in the chat, because I'm also streaming this online. There we go. You can message me directly if you're here on Zoom, or you can send it in the group chat too. I'll pop that up. So we'll just have 2 minutes where we can kind of answer some questions if anybody has any, and I will drink some water. This is also a great bathroom break if anybody wants to take a bathroom break. So if you're just now streaming in, we are talking about how to manage neurodivergent staff. We went over dyslexia, ADHD, autism specifically, some of the challenges and some of the strengths. We have another 1.5 minutes of a break. and we're going to come back in. Let me check the time too. Okay, we had until 1:30. So we will continue on in the next 70 seconds. And what we'll do is we'll dive into management styles. And so when I do these workshops on a larger level, meaning over the course of several hours, we dive in a lot more with practical challenges, like what you're facing in the workplace now. So if anybody wants to send me a message here on Zoom or put something in the chat here where I'm streaming, feel free to do that. We can talk about specific challenges that you're facing. I can do that offline as well if you're interested in that. Okay. All right. Management styles. Yeah. We'll talk about management styles on a high level because we're not going to be able to dive into it in a 90-minute. But we're gonna introduce it. Okay. I'm going to reshare my screen. Wow. If you were not coming back, you are now. Okay. Next up, management styles and how you can support while still honoring your management style. So say you're a supervisor. You are leading neurodivergent staff. It really does require a nuanced approach because one size does not fit all when we're talking about people. And honestly, AI too. There's lots of different AI bots that are trained certain ways. And so this is a good exercise as we introduce AI in lots of different places, right? Okay, so let's talk about challenges that I've heard from clients. First one on here, I've given them, meaning their staff, free rein and they don't seem interested. They were on task and hitting the marks. Now the project has fallen flat. They won't respond to emails in a timely manner, or maybe you've said this or had this come out of your mouth. I can't seem to get them to participate in meetings. That is a supervisor, manager, leader perspective. These are lots of different things that I hear day to day when I'm working with organizations. I want to give you the neurodivergent perspective now. That is what's in pink. Maybe you gave them free rein. Neurodivergent might be thinking, I'm not sure where to start. I have to do this right, or they won't trust me. What is the goal? I have so many questions. So they're already going through overwhelm in their brain. So maybe the one where they were on task and hitting marks, now they're flat. A neurodivergent brain might be, I can't make myself do this anymore. I was so excited. Why am I challenged now? Another one is they won't respond promptly to emails. I know I had something else, but where is it? Out of sight, out of mind. And the last one is, I hear this one a lot, and it's flipped both ways. I can't seem to get them to participate in the meetings, or they participate too much. The neurodivergent experience could be, there's so much going on. I can't read as fast as everybody else. I have to take good notes. What if these notes aren't good enough? And then you're telling yourself, just take notes. So instead of paying attention, they're just focused on taking notes and they're not absorbing and they're not participating. So let's talk about what is happening. So we had the two different perspectives. Let's talk about what is actually happening. So in the first example of the free rein on the project, there's no urgency or direction. We appreciate the autonomy and we need some boundaries here. Everybody, I think, benefits from that. Working on a brand new project is great. I think not having the autonomy or not having the direction can really paralyze lots of people, not just neurodivergent, but it can paralyze especially people who are neurodivergent. We want to know some of the boundaries to give us, and I'm going to give you an example. When we have free rein to do things, we might ask a lot more questions. We might come off as ungrateful, but really what we're trying to seek is clarity. So if you give me a project and you say, I want you to write about anything, I'm going to ask you, what do you mean? You want me to write a paper? You want me to write a 19-page paper? Do you want it sourced? Do you want my inner thoughts? Do you want just a bunch of poetry. Like I'm gonna seek to understand, like, if I'm in marketing, I'm gonna be like, well, who's the target market? What channels do I have access to? Do I have a budget? Do I not have a budget? Do I do this in my spare time, or is this my job now? Is it a long-term project or short-term project? The second thing on here is the whole they were on task, they're not anymore. They've lost interest. It's not new, novel. Maybe they hit a roadblock and it's boring now. The third point, they won't respond to emails. If something's out of sight, out of mind, maybe they're overwhelmed and too frazzled to answer. There's a lot of maybe the email was discombobulating or overwhelming because there was a lot of information in it. And they're just overall feeling overwhelmed and unsure where to go next. And finally, the one where it's like, I can't seem to get them to participate in meetings. There could be lots of reasons, but from a coach who works with people with autism, ADHD, and dyslexia, they might benefit from additional processing time, especially if you're talking about presentations around results, wanting them to ideate, etc. They could benefit from additional processing time. They could currently have social anxiety and overwhelm. And they could also just have nothing to add in the moment. And that's okay. Many people, I've interacted with lots of different people with autism. It depends on the day, depends on the flavor. That's why it's a spectrum. But sometimes they just don't have anything productive they feel like to add, so they don't talk. And that's not a bad thing. It just is different than what a lot of neurotypicals expect. So there are lots of different ways that you can experience the world. And as we said, people who are neurodivergent have additional layers that they experience that you may not see as a leader. So if you're already having challenges with your workload amount, because everybody is, because for lots of reasons, right? The important thing to know is that with ADHDers, autistics, etc., they're also experiencing sensory challenges. They might be experiencing slower processing speed due to distractions, due to interruptions, due to smells, due to lots of things. They might be worried about the perception of rejection with others in meetings. So they have a very deep inner world that takes a lot of energy too. And supporting them within the context of work can also involve a layered approach. I would love to hear from you what you experience in the workplace when it comes to supporting neurodivergent staff. Do you experience any of these things when it comes to people being excited about projects, or maybe you yourself excited about projects? Let's see. All right.
I feel like there's this like excitement and then this atrophy. So
Mm,
it's like, yay, like we're going to go and change the world, right?
yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, write an email, and that's too
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, it definitely can be. That is for sure. Um, it and it can be different day to day, right? Like you could be riding a high on Tuesday, and then you could be very low energy on Wednesday, and completing those same tasks can feel insurmountable. Okay, I did put out a poll. What are some of the challenges that you have with challenges with staff or colleagues at work that might exhibit ADHD, autistic, dyslexic, or neurodivergent traits? I'd love for you to list some of those out. We can talk through some of those things. All right. I'll wait for those to come through. Okay, so we're going to get into what you experience. All right. So I'm going to open those up real quick. Ah, there we go. All right. Are y'all able to still see my presentation? Yes, perfect. Thank you so much for letting me know because I obviously pick stuff up. And so one person said, I see that someone who is neurodivergent being misunderstood with communication, saying that they are being too sensitive and picking up on things that are being said the wrong way. Ooh, communication's a big one. Thank you for that. The other one was no follow through, tracking is bad, accountability, time blindness, overpromise. I adjust based on what I know about them. Okay. Okay, there's a lot in both of those. So thank you for putting those answers in. So before we get into thinking about how to approach those things, I want you to think about this question. How do you manage staff with your specific management style? So management styles vary person to person, and that's okay. And you also are allowed to honor your management style. So how do we do that? We focus on support. We don't necessarily want to just focus on, well, this is how I manage. I'm a micromanager, or I'm a laissez-faire manager, or I manage X way. We manage based on what works best for us and how we're able to work, as well as what the organization or the team needs. Those are very different things sometimes, but it's true. And then we focus on how we can support within the context of our skills. And if there are skills that are beyond our abilities, that's when we ask for help. That's when we reach out to tools, and that's when we accommodate ourselves to support staff. So when it comes to accommodations, AskJan.org is a wonderful resource. It's run by the Department of Labor in the US, and they did an employer survey for those that implemented accommodations. 85% of those employers said when they did, they retained a valuable employee. 48% said they saw greater employee attendance when they implemented accommodation. 46% eliminated costs, of course, with training a new employee. Makes a lot of sense. Those were the direct benefits. Now we get into the indirect. So Ask Jan's employee survey, indirect benefits of providing accommodations, 34% had improved interactions with coworkers. So when we think about the challenge with communication that you put into the chat, if you could improve communication by providing accommodation, that could maybe not eradicate, but improve interactions and experiences with coworkers. 21% of the employers surveyed said they saw greater company productivity. Holy macaroni is all I want to say. That's a lot. Being able to boost your productivity, 21% of the employers said we could do it after having an accommodation, and 19% of the employers said they saw overall improved company attendance. And so that's huge. That's huge. So that when people ask about why accommodations, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have formal. In the US, we have something called the American with Disabilities Act. Other countries have similar type of legislation that protects different people from getting to get the support in the workplace. ADHDers in England, for example, they have a benefit where they can actually have job coaching. That's if they have a diagnosis. So they can have an ADHD coach, and they get that benefit is paid through the government. We don't have that type of benefit in the US yet. I am hopeful. But there are lots of different ways that you can accommodate. So what does that look like for you? So I want you to take a minute. I want you to think about how you can support yourself as a leader. And we do that by, I want you to think for a minute about what your management style is. Because management styles, if we're able to put some type of, I mean, it's not necessarily a label, but it is. If we're able to identify how we approach leading, it could be management style, it could be leadership style. However you define that, you can blend it with the Enneagram, Hogan, whatever types of testing you've gone through. What is your management style? I'm going to give you 1 minute to think about that. And we're back. So when we think about management styles, it's good to have some examples. So one person said management style is to be determined. I hate being managers and would prefer just to self-manage and work on accountability to the goal and objective. Fair, fair, fair. And I think people's management styles change over time. And I make this comparison to parenting, is that my parenting changes as my child grows. My parenting also changes as my needs change. I went through a divorce. I went through leaving a corporate job and starting my own business. My parenting and my leadership styles change for each one of those moments. This is not meant to absolutely define exactly how you manage or exactly how you lead. It's meant to start moving in that direction of how I work best so that we're able to support people within that context. Okay, and we have some examples. So say you're a laissez-faire leader, you're a little hands-off. This is great for people who are pros, have high autonomy. Maybe somebody who's neurodivergent might struggle with this, that you have a hands-off approach. It could trigger rejection sensitivity if you don't respond. It could trigger perfectionism if you just pop in every now and then to see stuff and they're thinking that I have to have the absolute best version. The truth is that a laissez-faire leader, if they're doing all the right things, that person would be able to know that they're trusted. However, if you're managing neurodivergent staff or anybody new for that matter, a laissez-faire leadership style could add in clear deadlines with full pictures, meaning like, this is what I want it to look like roughly, being like, I want to give you a picture of what the goal is. I want to trust you to get there. I don't care about your process. I want you to get there. If you need something, let me know. Written directions are helpful, not just verbal. So if you email somebody and say, like, this is what I want you to complete, this is a report that's important for tomorrow, and it just hit across my desk. These are some things that I would benefit from getting. I know that you have access to, writing out those directions. And finally, the third point are predictable touch points. Giving somebody who is neurodivergent, autistic, ADHD especially, a touch point that they can look forward to, knowing when they're going to be expected to ask questions about their performance, ask questions about benefits, maybe even ask questions about upcoming quarterly goals. Giving them access to you in a regular cadence is helpful. What about autocratic? You're focused on results, you're focused on efficiency. Micromanaging is typically helpful for greener staff. This is really where this is beneficial. Place things to add in are having places for autonomy paired with clear deadlines and expectations. So giving somebody, and this is good for anybody, right? It's not just somebody who's neurodivergent, but especially a neurodivergent, autistic, and ADHD brain, we want to have some autonomy in our day. We need a little bit of novel. Okay. So having that with clear deadlines can really improve our engagement. And again, these are things that cost low, they are low to no cost actions, right? It's learning how to support within the context of your leadership style. The other thing is we don't require them to take notes that are shared with others that could be helpful and beneficial so that they're able to be present and participate. If that's something that you have to work out on your team, you're the leader. You can figure it out. I believe in you. And then having a project space where you can view progress and the team can add in updates. So if you are somebody who really wants to focus on efficiency and you want to know where everybody is all the time, giving them the ability to update a system so you don't have to go to them for every single step. So you can see their progress over time. There are lots of wonderful systems for that for low to no cost. Again, these are just examples. So some accommodations are on you, making some of those changes based on your management style. Other accommodations are on the staff member. So going back to what y'all said about some of the challenges that you experience at work. No follow through, tracking is bad, accountability, time blindness, overpromising, or seeing someone who is misunderstood with communication. There are things that the person who is neurodivergent is accountable to, like any human. They need to be able to say, I am challenged and I work best when. Hopefully they work in a psychologically safe space where they feel like they can be honest about that. That's the ideal. And there are things that they are responsible for doing. So we're going to get into a worksheet now. I'm going to share it in the chat. I'm also going to share it on my screen. So we're going to walk through this the last 15 minutes so that you can leave with an understanding of some clear next steps. Okay. So what I'm going to share in the chat, I'm also going to share it via email. This is a Google Doc. It's a PDF. So an important thing to know. Oh, let me share my screen again. This is the workshop part of today. I want you to think about how you work best. Giving yourself time and permission to think about, I work best when. You need to be able to answer that question. I work best when, pardon me, I can come in the morning, get set up for my day before everybody else comes in. I work best when I can wear comfortable clothes and have hyper-focused, dedicated deep work time in the afternoons. I work best when I can work from home and can change locations throughout the day because it helps me stay focused. I work best when I can collaborate with a team. I work best when I am provided clear deadlines. So think about all the different aspects of work and be able to answer for yourself as a leader, I work best when. Question number 2. What are some current challenges with my staff member? You listed those in the chat, so you already have those. Communication, being too sensitive and picking up things that are being said the wrong way. Some other challenges are time blindness, overpromising, no follow through. I want you to go to question number 3. And I'm going to give you a minute. I'll put the timer on. I want you to think about, what is the ideal situation with the team and myself? What is the ideal situation with the team and myself, specifically with this person that you might be having a challenge with, or with this person and the team as a whole? If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or come off mute. Okay. Lorraine, this is a great form. Is there a form you can give an employee to help explain their challenges and supports, or is this for employees too? This definitely can be for employees too. I will be sharing this resource over email tomorrow, along with the recording, as well as one that you can give your employees. I call it like my I work best when paper. So yeah, absolutely. I'm here for it. I think it is important for you to start with self, because for us to be great leaders, to get the best out of our teams, we have to be present with ourselves and see what some challenges that we have. Okay, so you've got now what your ideal situation is with your team and yourself, especially with the staff member. Question number 4, are there any patterns between how I work best and the challenges that I'm experiencing? with the staff member or staff members. So I want you to think about, are there any patterns between how I work best and the challenges that you're experiencing? I'm just going to give you an informal minute. Okay. So we're going to keep going. On the next page, it's a little sideways, but if you print it off, it'll be helpful. We've got, if I can turn it, I can't right now. So on this page, we have 4 columns. You have the challenge area that you have. One of them might be communication or misunderstanding around what has been said. The other thing could be time blindness and follow-up. I want you to write down the challenge area. I want you to write down what to do, what you're doing now. Maybe you have implemented accommodation, whether formal or informal, what you're doing now. And then I want you to write, what can I do? And finally, this is the important part, what I'd like for it to provide. And before you go too deep into it, I want you to come to lead with curiosity, because we cannot decide accommodations in a vacuum. Really, we do not want to assume. On the very bottom of page 4, we talk about this a little bit, is giving people an opportunity to answer how they work best and what they think they need. And knowing that as we go in to provide accommodations and supports, it's not about what we think will help them, because how they perceive and how they experience the world is fundamentally different. Either from somebody who is autistic and they experience, 40% more stimuli over the course of the day than you do, or somebody with ADHD who struggles with impulsivity in meetings and talking over people and just really taking over the space. So leading with curiosity as their manager and as a leader, what would help them in that situation? So that in the ADHD example, it could be that they exercise taking notes for themselves and they have to count to 5 before they add on, or they write down their thought briefly so they don't forget it instead of interrupting, because other people also deserve to be heard. So leading with curiosity and asking them what would help them, and knowing that there might be some tweaks along the way that you have to make. So I recommend filling out that form. What is the challenge area? What I do now? What can I do? And what I'd like for it to provide. Sometimes when we go from maybe somebody's not finishing projects, managers have a tendency to start micromanaging, saying like, I check in with them every day. I tell them what needs to be done today. And that can add in more overwhelm. I see that a lot in the work I do. And so making sure that you're putting in there what would I'd like for it to provide is important to say like, oh, I'd like for it to provide guidance for the day. And then that can provide an approach for you to take when talking with your staff member to say, out of curiosity, this is an option. Would that work for you? Or would that not work for you? So from here, when you think of, am I sharing? I am sharing my screen. Okay. You are sharing the screen. I want to kind of see what I'm sharing, making sure that you'll see. Yeah, okay. When you are moving through how to support your staff, especially from like a communication standpoint, I would encourage you, instead of focusing on like with the communication of being misunderstood with communication, saying they're being too sensitive, instead of just focusing maybe on the meeting where it happened or on that specific interaction, there could be a root challenge there. So there's a couple of questions you can ask. What needs to be true for you to feel comfortable with what is happening right now? It's like, what are you experiencing? that people are telling you you're being too sensitive to? Okay. And why do you feel that way? Because what that does is now you're opening a door to say, like, well, because, they've shoved the door in my face 3 times over the past year. Well, you didn't know that as a leader. Like, it could be an issue. What was it you suggested if someone keeps interrupting? Oh, if somebody keeps interrupting, that is a conversation for one-on-one. That's not a conversation to figure out how to stop people interrupting in the moment, unless you've had a conversation beforehand. So what I would do is I would have a conversation with them away from, group meetings. And I would say, it's a real challenge for us. The challenge that we're having right now is you are interrupting. You're fabulous at X, Y, and Z. And this is an area of opportunity. What needs to be true for you to be able to give space to other people on the team in those meetings? And then what are some of the challenges that you're having in not interrupting? And start the conversation from there. But it's important to acknowledge this is a challenge for them. This is an area of opportunity for growth, to engage other team members, to build that trust. What could you say to them that shows you hear them, but you need them to write down points first, then suggest? Yeah, it's kind of what I just went into. Would that be okay to say, or is that not being accommodating? I would say it really depends on your relationship. Obviously, everybody is challenged when it comes to something at work. It's not just neurodivergent people. And if you know that they have, say, ADHD, and they've disclosed that to you, it depends on what country you're in, of course. So please defer to if there's certain laws around it, to where you need to go and figure that stuff out. And as a leader, I would lead with curiosity and ask them what needs to be true for you to allow for more space with the team in meetings. And you can say, I have some ideas and I would love to hear from you. Has there been a time where you've been able to manage that well? I want your input. I want your insight. I also want it from other members of the team. So an example that I have a client whose brain works super, super fast, and they usually have an answer before most of the other people on the team. And so they were always interrupting people to speed up the meeting because they were saying, well, it's very inefficient if I already know the answer. And what I explained to them was other people also deserve to be heard in a meeting. And you having the answer is great, but it means nothing if the rest of the team is not on board and coming with you. So what needs to be true for you to be able to function in those meetings that you feel like are inefficient because you already have an answer, and to give space for other people to process and to possibly bring other ideas and inform your thinking? What needs to be true for you to get there? So what needs to be true? When have you been in a space where you were able to kind of sit back and let other people finish? And then you kind of get into the tactical strategies, like you said, where you, write down what they want to say. Sometimes having a fidget is helpful. So like I've got lots of different fidgets that kind of keep me focused a little bit. So that's where I would start. What's worked? What has not worked? How are you supporting yourself? And then you kind of get into tactics. Does that answer your question? That was a lot to answer. Perfect. Okay, cool. I'm glad you feel like you've got a place to start. Great. And again, this is a short masterclass on how to work on it, right? Like there's so many avenues we could go down. So if you are looking for taking next steps, let me know, Christina@neurodivergentventures.com. And I'm here to provide training. I also do one-on-one coaching for adults and professionals with busy brains and big ideas. Get organized, stay focused, and create routines to help them lead without burning out. And a big part of that is learning how to be a member of a team and to really be seen as a leader. So, what other questions can I answer today? Because right now we're wrapping up. So, TikTok, if you've got questions, let me know if you would like to receive this presentation. I have it. It's going to be sent out to my email list too. So if you signed up via Eventbrite, you'll get this tomorrow. I'll send it over via email. You'll get the slides, the neurodivergent staff plan, as well as a couple of other resources. Ooh, and Lorraine, I did want to say that you will also receive let me pull it up, a workbook for self-accommodation. So this could be something that your colleague or somebody would benefit from. Let's open that baby up. And so this could also be something that could be utilized too. And so what self-accommodations are essentially are things that people do for themselves to support themselves in the workplace. It's exactly what it sounds like. So self-accommodations, there's always room for formal accommodations, right? And accommodations that other people provide them. So it talks a little bit about informal versus formal, but we come into accommodation zones. Pardon me, there's 3 zones in this workbook: home, work, and leisure. If you're coming into work, and this is something for everybody to know as a leader, if you notice that somebody's coming in emotionally dysregulated at work every day, they're starting their day dysregulated. It is incredibly difficult to regulate once you're at work. Emotional regulation is a tool, but it's not just a tool. Emotionally regulating is key for success in most areas of your life, right? So when people are trying to figure out how to accommodate themselves at work, we always start at home. Because if you don't feel comfortable being at home and being calm at home, it's going to be really tough for you to do those things at work. So we have a workbook that you'll receive. It walks through some very simple questions about play and leisure, giving you some prompts to how you can accommodate at home, as well as some ideas. It also gets into play. Play and leisure time is important, and accommodations are there too. And then it gets into work. A key question: what are areas where I'm thriving? Where could I see challenges arising? Where are they already arising? Do I feel safe and comfortable in my workspace? What would my ideal work situation look like? What needs to be true to get there? Now, my ideal work situation may not align with my current role. That's okay. That is okay. It just means that I need to be aware of how I would benefit from accommodating myself or my staff member along the way. So examples of self-accommodation at work, as well as a practical example. Names have been changed, but it's a previous client. And then we get into the I work best when. What would my ideal work situation look like? Yeah, Lorraine, this would be something that you could give them and to get ideas. I wouldn't necessarily say, hey, and then give it back to me, but it could be something that you give them and say, especially if you know that they would benefit from some self-accommodations, because we need to hold ourselves accountable to provide ourselves with accommodations in the workplace too, and know when we work best. So they could start with this and then come to the table and say, I have some ideas on how I can accommodate myself. It might change how my schedule looks. Like one of the examples in here is that Sandra has fibromyalgia, is dyslexic, and is ADHD, autistic and ADHD. So what she ends up doing, and we worked through this together, was she was able to come up with, I work best when I have clear deadlines, have boundaries, have support with my sensory needs, and I can process content before discussing. So she came up with a self-accommodation. She requested agenda items, wore noise canceling headphones. She'd turn off Slack and messaging from her personal phone. And then she had templated email responses when people didn't provide deadlines. So she wasn't stressed about how to respond and ask for that. So you could give this to them so that they can come to a conversation with you or an email and say, I work best when these are some of the things to know. And then you can have that conversation from there. This is more for this section right here, leadership, self-accommodations, and inclusivity. This goes over some of the data that we talked about already from the Department of Labor. And then we can get into what can you do as a leader to encourage and self-support accommodation. Start with yourself. Maybe even communicating how you accommodate yourself, Lorraine. That would be a good way to start. And then you get into questions to add staff. What would need to be true to support your work? What boundaries do you need at work? Having honest conversations about what is best for physical and digital workplace looks and feels like. So that's it. So if you, okay, yeah, that was just the question you asked. If you would like to receive update, yeah, you're very welcome. So thank you for coming to the masterclass today about how to effectively manage neurodivergent staff. This was a speed round because I usually do this over the course of 3 hours, and you got the hyper quick version of it. I will email out the recording to anybody that signed up via Eventbrite, and you will receive the self-accommodation workbook, the management, how to manage staff management plan, so you can start thinking about how to support, as well as the slides for today. So if you have questions, feel free to email me. I'm available. I will have additional in-person as well as virtual trainings. I am launching those. Those will be scheduled all the way throughout August. So if you have other people who'd benefit from this, please send them the recording or let them know when my next event is. Otherwise, thanks for joining, and I'll hopefully see y'all soon.